And show live. Yes, we are live now. Hello, friends. I'm Mohana Chatterjee, project lead for the Story Project 9 at www.tellmeastory.biz. Welcome you to the fifth episode of the Dandakaranya series. I'm a student of history and currently pursuing my PhD on the partition refugees who were rehabilitated in the Dandakaranya region. Tell Me a Story calls for submission of poetry and short stories on the writing from Dandakaranya. Today's topic is the refugees. Bengali refugees in search of new home in modern day Dandakaranya. Under Project Dandakaranya of 1958, Dandakaranya was chosen as the place of rehabilitating the Bengali refugees who came from East Pakistan. In this panel discussion, we are going to discuss about these Bengali refugees and their struggle in finding home in a place completely alien to them. We'll also try to discover the overlap of myth and reality over here. I'm privileged to have with us Anusua Basu Choudhary, Debjani Sengupta, and Anindita Ghoshal this evening, and I take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed panelists to the audience. Anusha Basu Roy Choudhury is a senior fellow at Observer Research Foundation of Kolkata. She mentors research on migration and displacement, public perception and connectivity. She specializes in South Asia refugees, post-migration and women in conflict zone. She has recently co-authored the book Caste and Partition in Bengal: The Story of Dalit Refugees 1946 to 1961 along with eminent historian Shekhar Bandyopadhyay. Debjani Sengupta has authored The Partition of Bengal, Fragile Borders and New Identities, Women's Writing from India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, The Worlds of Bangla and Urdu and Bangladesh, writing on 1971 Across Borders, both co-edited with Rakshadhan Jalil. Sengupta teaches at Indraprastha College of Women, University of Delhi. Anindita Ghoshal is an associate professor of history at Diamond Harbour Women's University of Kolkata. Her area of research includes partition and refugee studies with special emphasis on East and Northeastern India and Bangladesh. Her first monogram has been published by Routledge and titled Refugees, Border and Identities, Right and Habitat in East and Northeast India. And her second book, titled Revisiting Partition, Contestation Narratives and Memories, has been published by Primus recently. I want to add something over here. Anindita ma'am also happens to my PhD supervisor. Yes, I am pursuing my PhD under her guidance only. So now I would like to continue with the session. So I would first like to invite Anushwa ma'am to tell something about today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much. Uh, Good evening to everyone, the TMYS members, my friends, my co-panelists, and all our guests today who are listening to us. It is my pleasure to take part in this important and very timely discussion today. When we are celebrating our 75th anniversary of our independence, there is a need to unfold some unheard stories from the eastern part of India, where population flows from the other side of the border became almost a continuous process for a long period of time after partition 1947. In this session, we are discussing different aspects of rehabilitation of the displaced persons. Yes, I consciously use the word displaced persons. As a researcher working on this topic, I have not found the word refugee in the refugee rehabilitation manual of the Indian government and also the West Bengal government, and that's why I am consciously using the word displaced persons from East Pakistan and East Bengal. Yes, I would like to raise few points here in relation to dispersal plans, I think, which is very pertinent while we are dealing with displaced persons and their rehabilitation in Dandakaranya. And so far, we are focusing on Dandakaranya scheme. I think before entering into the discussion, what is very important is to understand the politics of recognition. whom we are going to recognize and whom we are not recognizing. Through the discussion of dispersal plans, I think these politics of recognition will come up in our discussion on the surface. According to the Constitution of India, promulgated in 1950, relief and rehabilitation was, as we all know, a state subject, and so the state government in West Bengal, under the Chief Minister of Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy, actually was responsible to take steps to deal with these sudden massive influx of refugees that continued for years in varying and uncertain flows. Uh, well, uh, in the initial phase, between 1948 1949, a number of refugees between 1.3 and 1.5 million people, the West Bengal government actually offered a reasonably good rehabilitation package, including cash tolls and evacuation allocation, eventual allocation of plots of agricultural land or homestead land with loans for development or reclaiming the land and building homes. But so far as the displaced persons, or as we often use refugees as popular parlance, the arrival of new arrivals of these refugees are concerned, government's actually plan was to offer them the same facilities, but there was also a realization that these people will perhaps require more relief before they can be expected to be rehabilitated. And it is very important to identify that when the second wave of refugee influx started immediately after the violence broke out in December 1949. So it started since 1950. The central government was thinking of a dispersal plan as a possible solution to the problem of rehabilitation of the East Bengali refugees. And you know, the crux of the story is so far as the second wave of population influx is concerned, relief was the main, relief was the main focal point, it was a main focal point so far as the government's responsibilities are concerned. And it was not rehabilitation. Uh, but after 1954, the government, both the central government as well as the state government, they were in a situation to understand that probably it was not a passing scenario or passing phase, and these would be the constant reality in this part of India, and that's why they wanted to take up a specific plan for rehabilitation, which is called dispersal plan. And when we are talking about the Dandakaranya scheme, it was also a part of this dispersal plan. And initially, in December 1956, the central government directly took over the responsibility, because we know that initial phase it was under the responsibility of the state government, but in December 1956, the central government directly took over the responsibility of rehabilitation, and they were tremendously impatient to close all the refugee camps by 31st July 1959. So they wanted to disperse forcefully coarsely the refugees, those who took shelter in the refugee camps. It is also very interesting point to note that who actually took shelter in refugee camps in West Bengal. These camp dwellers, mostly, 80 to 85% belong to the agriculturalists and this community, and they are basically, the scheduled castes and the Dalits of the scheduled caste society community. And in this way, basically, the dispersal plan uh, was mainly meant for this category of people. So a caste factor, naturally came into existence, and these people, they were forced to leave their land. Once, as we know, that once you are displaced, you are always displaced, and it has become true for these hapless people because they were forced to leave their homeland because of partition associated tussles and disturbances. And then again, they wanted to take shelter in the camps. And for the second time, they got displaced because of this, dispersal plan. And they were forced to go to outside West Bengal because both the central government and the state government that they thought that a kind of saturation uh, point came. So far as the rehabilitation of these hapless people were concerned within the state of West Bengal because of the scarcity of land. Though the opposition parties, political parties, and the leaders, they say that there were the possibilities and the chances to rehabilitate these people within West Bengal, but they were forced to leave that land, and they were forced to take, to forced to settle in the area which is not very congenial for their own survival, and according to as per their perception, and also according to the reports, the land was not very it was inhospitable, and also irrigated nature of land, so the life was miserable in these area. But it's very interesting also that in that particular point of time, these people, these hapless, displaced people, they were not, uh, uh, they were not. Uh, they were not accepted the fact very easily. So they were not regarded themselves as the recipient of the discourse, but they became eventually the participant of the politics of agitation and politics of rehabilitation, so that they participate extensively in the Satyagraha movement, civil disobedience movements against this dispersal plan as their resistance. And also, as these camps are the sites of exceptions. And that's why this space was occupied by the other political leaders. They wanted to nurture this space for the sake of their own existence, and that's why all the political parties like CPI, like PSP, and Hindu Mahasabha, all the political parties, along with the refugee organizations like UCRC, SBPS, and also the other organizations. They were also very keen to grab this opportunity to engage these people for the sake of their own existence and for the sake of their own increasing support base. So, in a nutshell, there is a politics of recognition where the first the batches who came in the first phase of 19 I think between 1948 to 1950, uh, they were basically regarded as assets, so far as the governments of West Bengal as well as the central government was concerned, and so far as the the major population in blocks who migrated immediately after 1950, they were basically recognized as burden so far as the governments were concerned. So I'll stop here and probably come back again with other points.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You have very nicely elaborated the whole thing about how these refugees ended up being in Dandakaranya, their struggle, their satyagraha. You have like sum up the everything very perfectly in a very short time, and we really thank you for this insightful conversation. So now I'd like to move on to the next panelist. So now invite Debjani, ma'am, to tell something about today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for inviting me. With my very illustrious co-panelists, I have read their work extensively when I was doing my work, so I'm very delighted to be with them on the same panel. I would like to very quickly begin where Anasua actually stops. And she has taken up very important threads, and I would like to sort of elaborate a little bit on that. She mentions that the Dandakaranya rehabilitation plan is conceived in 1956, and this is particularly because by the 1955 onwards, 54 onwards, the West Bengal government is already very publicly stating that the refugee problem is not its own. That the huge number of refugees that the state is receiving, when the state has become 1/3 its original size, is completely a very unfair burden, and therefore the question of settling the refugees should actually be taken up by other adjoining states. So we have to also remember that Dandakaranya is not an isolated rehabilitation plan. There was a massive rehabilitation plan to send displaced persons to Andaman, to neighboring Orissa, and to Bihar, and to Assam. And therefore, there were this concerted effort by the West Bengal government to actually, push the second wave of refugees who were coming in. And as Anasua rightly mentions, they are mainly agriculturalists. They would need rehabilitation through land. They would actually not need rehabilitation. They would need resettlement. So I would like to use the word resettlement because they would need land to settle down. And in spite of all the political parties which said that, West Bengal has enough land, the government actually said that, the politics of recognition, I think, can also be stretched a little bit and I would say that it is also the politics of caste. Because the whole question of recognition is, as Anasua rightly points out, it is absolutely central to the identity of these displaced people who were coming after 1950. They were the agriculturalists, the Namoshudros, the Pondro Khotrios, the Barujibi, and all the different scheduled castes who had begun to leave East Pakistan by now in very large numbers. Given the fact that their leader Jogendranath Mondal had already although he was a minister in the East Pakistani government, he was also, by the 1950s, he had also sort of come back. So the fact that this huge amount of Namashudro, Pondro Khotriyos, and other scheduled caste people were arriving in the state was actually an enormously a troubling scenario, and this is the moment when the central government steps in, and in June, for instance, in the National Development Council meeting in June 1957, it was decided that Dandakaranya will be a place where a large-scale resettlement policy will take place. Now, I want to stress again that Dandakaranya is not alone. Already there were movements towards Andaman, there were movements towards camps in Orissa, in Bihar, but Dandakaranya was conceived as a kind of, a very large, one of the largest resettlement projects in post-independent India. And I think we have to be very mindful of this, that this was an area which was, and everybody knew, including the state government as well as the central government, of the magnitude of the task. It was a humongously huge task, because this was an area between, earlier there was, they had asked for very fertile land along the Godavari River. But at the last minute, Andhra Pradesh refused to part with the land. And therefore, ultimately, what they ended up with was the area in Bastar and Koraput, which are, again, as Anasua had already mentioned, extremely infertile. It was not conducive to irrigation. It was covered with primeval forests. And therefore, to settle a huge amount of people, a huge number of people who actually lived in riverine Gangetic basin, and to take them into a kind of primeval forest area with very little rainfall, and with very sparse population. This was one of the reasons why Dandakaranya was actually chosen, because of the sparsity of its population. If it was a densely populated area, it would not be chosen. But also remember that Dandakaranya, the area, the geographical area, you have to, when we discuss this Dandakaranya project, we have to also remember the geographical nitty-gritties of that area, where these people were being pushed to. And these were hilly terrain, these were rocky terrain, very little rainfall, covered with primeval forests. So actually the plan was that these people would be forced and coerced into going to Dandakaranya, and they would be made to work to clear the land where they would then resettle. So the government decided to have one of the largest camps, the Mana camp. And Ashoka Gupta and Shoibal Kumar Gupta, who was the first chairperson of the Dandakaranya Development Authority, they have left fantastic accounts of, the whole project in very vivid detail. And in Shoibal Kumar Gupta's book, you are absolutely given a very, very stark understanding of, what actually Dandakaranya meant. And I'm going to just read a very small section from Shoibal Kumar's memoir, Kichu Sriti Kichu Katha, just to give you an idea about the enormity of the task. And I'm quoting from Shoibal Kumar Gupta. The development of Dandakaranya was undertaken to solve an almost intractable human problem: the rehabilitation of a large number of refugees who were uprooted from their homeland in East Pakistan, victims of a political decision to divide the country in which they were not consulted. Dandakaranya was expected to provide a home for the residuary refugee, please notice the word residuary refugee population in camps elsewhere, for whom there was supposed to be no more room in West Bengal. More than 22 crores of rupees. This is 1956. 22 crores of rupees have already been spent, and further expenditures are in the offing. But barely 7,000 families have been given rehabilitation of sort in the course of 5 to 6 years. What is the end result of all this expenditure of time and money? What are the prospects? It is time that a proper assessment was made and people saw Dandakaranya without any blinkers. End of quote. Just imagine the kind of things that was happening on the ground and what was being actually also recorded. So I think it is very timely that, in 25 years of the independence that we are all celebrating, with Azadi Ke Amrit Mahotsav, in the Amrit, there is also lots of poison, and I think as people who are interested in that history, we have to also understand how this rehabilitation was also a kind of gigantic failure from the start. It was a gigantic failure. Let me stop here and I will come back, of course, later on with added questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Like you have spoken so well. I'm getting this really spine-chilling moments, and you have very nicely pointed out all the things that were wrong with this project from the very beginning. Like a huge sum of money was allocated to this project, and the people they didn't get it for their own benefit. It just vanished somewhere, and there this is something that we researchers need to think about, that where this large chunk of money ultimately evaporated. So really, thank you so much. So now I would like to invite Dr. Anindita Ghoshal to tell us something about today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mohana. First, I wish to thank Tell Me Your Story, Koral Dasgupta, and you all for providing me with the opportunity to share my research here and with two very eminent panelists who are very close to my heart again. So I'm actually grateful to both the panelists for their kind of voices or their kind of analysis. So I will just try to elaborate their points a little bit more. But since I'm trained as a historian, so I have a tendency to talk about dates and talk about like facts and to situate my research with some kind of documentary evidences. So first point that I wish to make here is that when we'll talk about Dandakaranya, first we'll have to think about the time that when that actually happened. So if we think about the time, so it is actually publicly, it was announced in, as we all know, in 1958. But this idea actually got conceived in the year 1956. And actually by 1956, a government, after the introduction of the passport and visa system, the central government, they realized that, okay, these refugees, they are not going to go. First, it was initially thought that these refugees, they will probably they will go back once the riot situation will be okay, especially after the Borishal riot of 1950. But when they realized that no, these refugees, they are not going to go away, so first they actually thought of a place in which they will be able to give this huge like population a kind of resettlement or rehabilitation. But when that idea happened, what they did first, they declared that after 1958 the refugee families will decide to migrate. And as they knew that they were kind of helpless as governments, the central government, they already have introduced that passport and visa system, the document regime as per Wazira Zamindar. So they knew that these actually refugee families, they are helpless, they can't live in that land, and they have decided that they can't actually afford to rehabilitate them in West Bengal, obviously, Assam, as Assam was burning at that point of time, and also Tripura, as Tripura was also full. But before that, the central government, with the help of the state government, they tried to experiment like the resettlement of the refugees in Andaman, but that project was kind of successful. But the horrible actually outcome started coming from the refugees who got settled down in Bethia, Bihar. They actually decided to come back after 1950. But what happened after 1955, when they realized that after the Borishal riot, lots of people, just like the way Dr. Anasua Choudhary has mentioned, she has worked more on it. All these like downtrodden classes and downtrodden castes, they actually they thought that they can't stay in that land anymore, so they will have to come here. So the problem was like the way Shekhar Bandyopadhyay always like mentions about a cultural capital. They were poor and they were not that skilled, and they were, the most problematic part was they were not urban, so they didn't have any urban skill. So they were from village and they didn't know what to do with that, as they used to have only one kind of skill, which was always a professional kind of skill. Okay, so either they were agriculturists or they were like they were goldsmiths or something like that. So they were, their profession was like that. And if we read about East Bengal, so there was a concept of villages in which the caste people, they used to reside. Okay, so a kind of like security was there, that they are with their own people. So their feeling of like own people was very very different from the feeling of like own people of the elite classes, or the probably the middle class, or the upper middle class. So when actually these people, they decided to migrate, they knew that they will have to settle down somewhere outside West Bengal, Assam and Tripura, as the government has decided that they will declare that portion was like full, those states were full. But if we read the intelligence bureau reports carefully, IB records carefully, and the primary sources like which are available in Tinmurti Bhavan or National Archives, so actually the UCRC leaders, they started protesting against sending these refugees to Dandakaranya right from 1956 57. So it's actually irony of the situation that as government officially declared this Dandakaranya project in the year 1958, but the UCRC people, they have started protesting against sending these refugees to Dandakaranya right from 1957. And if you notice the primary sources carefully, that I read somewhere that only though the government, they tried hard to show Dandakaranya or to portray Dandakaranya as a place like which money probably they will get everything like the way they were there in their villages. So they publish like nice photos of the agriculturists, nice like photos of the gardens, and like they try to show that it's very green, just like East Bengal. So if we actually, there is one newspaper which is available in National Library Annex building, anyone can like consult that. I'm just saying it for the research scholars if someone is hearing it. So it is available in the Annex building of National Library, and the name of this paper is West Bengal Weekly. So it was a weekly newspaper, and if someone consults that newspaper, actually they have, since it's a state government newspaper, so they have actually published extensively about Dandakaranya. So that's a very very good source, I believe, as I could actually consult probably all their issues. Huh? So if you actually read those sources, the primary sources, and the accounts of the refugees, like the account of Monoranjan Bapari, maybe the account of, like I read something, the name of the, it's like a memoir, an autobiography or a diary. The name of the source is Aranyalipi by Amiya Sen. She worked in Dandakaranya as a Red Cross volunteer. So if you read like these documents, these sources and the primary sources, like the way both the central government and the state government, they try to like project their policies on Dandakaranya or on people and the voices of the refugees, like we were actually there at that point of time. So we'll be able to actually see that the difference between the popular kind of sources or popular kind of popular kind of understanding and the refugee voices. So I read one letter actually in Tinmurti Bhavan from a refugee who got settled, whose family got settled down in Dandakaranya, and he wrote categorically and in Bangla. So he wrote categorically, as the government, they decided, both the governments actually, he tried to blame both the government, both the central government and the state government, and he categorically mentioned that, you know, these both the governments, they have decided to like settle us in Dandakaranya, so that even if we protest and even if we try to like tell our points to people, so it is so far away and it is so cut off from the center. So the idea of core and periphery was so actually prominent in his kind of voice. So like we'll not be able to hear it. And just like the way both Debjani ma'am and Anasua, they have pointed out that actually there was a politics behind publishing as well. Like who was publishing what and what was the actual voice. And like the way Shoibal Kumar Gupta has written after, like he decided that he will not continue with that, and the way Ashoka Gupta has written or Renuka Rai has written, but they probably they couldn't write in the way they wanted to write, as they were a part of the government. But if we read the refugee voices or the autobiographies or like the experiences of the refugees, so we'll be able to figure out that how dangerous it was. Number two, I wish to share another issue, which is probably not that popular, as like the way we all know that how these refugees who migrated from West Bengal to Dandakaranya, what happened to them. But we don't know that what happened to the refugees who tried to got settled down in Kachar, especially Borak Valley, as they thought that they are their own people, as they migrated from the same spaces or same areas, or people who tried to migrate in Tripura. So it was actually a truckload of refugees, and the government compelled them to like disperse from their place, and they actually compelled them to like get settled down in Dandakaranya. And if we read the IP records of probably the leaders of accounts of the leaders of the UCRC, though they had political interest, they tried to make these refugees their kind of vote bank. So that intention was very much there, but still, probably because of their intention only, they tried to write down that what was actually happening to the refugees. The point what I want to mention, which I read in a local newspaper called Jagoron, which was to publish from Agartala, Tripura. So it was written there, even the camp officials, they were not Bengalis. So, and like these Bengali refugees, like only and their Bangla was also a different kind of Bangla, but they were actually, they could converse in probably West Bengal kind of Bangla. So they could pick up that, but they were not like seasoned with their language. So when someone fell sick, or when a child, I was actually reading in an account of Omiya Sen that when a mother, she asked for another glass of milk for her baby, the government official says that they can't do it, so she can put some kind of water in that, and so that it looks a kind of white, so the baby will feel that probably it's milk. So we can understand that they left their dish, which was fine. So it was a partition kind of politics. I don't want to mention about that politics, but you can understand that if the treatment, or if the like attitude of the central government was such that they didn't even care that what is happening to this huge uproot populace. So it was actually very problematic from the beginning. And I wish to mention that when the UCRC leaders, they demanded and they compelled the government to open a hospital for children, the government actually they actually opened that hospital, but they opened that hospital in a poultry. So can you imagine that how horrible it is? And when I was working with director Tanvir Mokammel for a documentary movie called Shimanto Rekha, so we tried to shoot in Dandakaranya. So they were telling me that it was actually their feeling of otherness was in each and every level. Number one, they were not seasoned with the language, they were not seasoned with the land, like the way Debjani ma'am and Anusua ma'am they have elaborated, and they were not seasoned with the kind of officials, and they were like aliens to them, and they were not supportive at all. Rather, they tried to like get their money from their amount of doles, and they gave them the worst quality of rice probably, and they died. If you read the account of Monoranjan Bapari, you can understand that how horrible the situation was. And moreover, like the basic thing which government advertised in all the newspapers, like they are trying to open the health centers, the schools, and all the other facilities. The most problematic part was nothing was actually there. So the situation was not worse probably before the riot of 1964. But if we read the account of Omya Sen Oronolipi, actually that book is not available. So it's very unfortunate. So someone should take initiative to publish that book. I read that book in the Regenstein Library, Chicago. It's very strange that it is not available here, but it is available in the Library of Chicago. So she actually wrote that what happened after the riot of 1964. So before the riot of 1964, like who have migrated from 1958 to 1963 probably, they got at least some kind of rehabilitation or some kind of land, probably 5.5 land, like the government has actually the government has allotted for them. But after the riot of 1964, so it was like a flood of refugees. So Omya Sen has written that she got a telegram as she used to work for Red Cross, that a refugee train is coming. So when the refugee train arrived in a station called Raipur, so they were shocked as they found 5,778 refugee families. So you can understand the number of the refugees in one night. So they were clueless, and she wrote that there were only two tents were there, and they could like arrange maybe 100 tents, and it was raining so much and nothing was there. So the refugees like who left their land with the expectation of like settle down in another country. And for those refugees, like when I interviewed them, they always like told me that for them it was shadhinata, for them it was independence. So first they hesitated to protest, they thought that okay, like it came with the idea of independence. So they should actually bear with that. So they didn't protest as its Radhinata, as its independence, and they actually they were very hesitant to use that word partition. So they started using that word partition after actually 1955. So these like dimensions, these multi-layered like issues are so important. So I really feel that the researchers and the social scientists, they should work more on the Dandakaranya, and the identity issues obviously are there. I will elaborate it later. So I actually in this talk I tried to project that what was happened to the people who got settled down in Dandakaranya and their voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You have very nicely elaborated the how the dream was shown to them and how their reality was very different. Like there was nothing similar between the picture perfect dream and what they had to live through. And you have also given account of very nice sources that a researcher can consult whoever is interested in carrying forward research on this domain. And really, thank you for that. So now we would like to proceed to the question answer session. If there is a question that is targeted towards someone, but you have something else to add, then please feel free to share your thoughts after the primary speaker had shared his or her opinion. So now my first question is for Anasua ma'am. Ma'am, your new book, Caste and Partition in Bengal, the story of Dalit refugees, 1946 to 61, that you co-authored with historian Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, vividly describes the Dandakaranya project. In fact, on its very cover page, we can see a picture of the refugees living for Dandakaranya in trucks labeled as Dandakaranya project. Can you please tell us more about your book? Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you're muted. Ma'am, your mic.
Yes, thank you so much, Mohana, for giving me the floor to say a few words on our newly published book entitled Caste and Partition in Bengal, the story of Dalit refugees between 1947 and 1961, which has been published by Oxford University Press in this year. Before going to discuss the various facets with which we have dealt in this book, I think I would like to add one or two points after listening to Debjani as well as Anindita. Taking cue from their deliberations, I think it is also important to understand why I have raised in my initial comments the politics of recognition. uh, who are being compelled or forced to go to Dandakaranya. These are the camp dwellers. And who were the camp dwellers? The camp dwellers mostly belong to uh, cultivators communities and also from the scheduled castes. And it is very interesting to note that at that time they were regarded as a unit of productive labor. So the concept of labor was very much uh, into uh, into the plan of dispersal, and also it had from both central government and as well as the West Bengal government, from their perspective, the entire Dandakaranya plan, Dandakaranya scheme, as well as their scheme to disperse, this population, disperse population to the places outside West Bengal. It had two main objectives. First, of course, to rehabilitate, or in the name of rehabilitation, just dumping a group of hapless community to an inhospitable land. By using the illusionary term that they would get New Bengal if they migrated from West Bengal to the other places outside West Bengal, the place would be congenial for their survival. And the second one is, of course, the utilization of their labor for the development of that particular land, and also for the sake of development of local tribal communities. So these two important objectives actually were inherent in this entire plan of Dandakaranya scheme. So now come back to our newly published book. Yes, it's an offshoot of long-term collaborative research, and it's my privilege to work with Professor Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, an eminent historian and pioneer researcher who worked extensively on caste in Bengal, more precisely on Namasutra community. Our book situates caste as a discursive category against the backdrop of discussion on partition in Bengal. In conventional narratives of partition 1947, we know that the role of Dalit or the scheduled castes and their organization, namely, All India Scheduled Castes Federation, is either completely ignored or mentioned as passing reference. So, keeping this fact in consideration, we have tried to address the discursive absence and have argued that in Bengal the Dalits were neither passive onlookers, but nor accidental victims of partition politics and violence, which ruptured their unity and weakened their political autonomy. Indeed, they were the worst victims of partition. And when the Dalit peasants of East Bengal began to migrate to India after 1950, in fact, we all know that 1947 to 1950, they didn't want to leave their land. There are several reasons behind that. One is Dalit Muslim alliance, as they did not have any kind of class conflict between these two sections these two communities, and also because of the influence of scheduled caste federation leaders on their followers, and they think that this Dalit Muslim alliance actually will be productive for their survival even after partition, and that's why they did not feel to migrate between 1947 to 1950, when the other upper caste Hindus actually migrated because they had social capital, with them. But as Anindita also specified, that these hapless communities, scheduled caste communities, they did not have this kind of social capital because they belong to downtrodden society and mostly agriculturalists. Well, in our book, we have dealt primarily with the camp refugees and their struggle for rehabilitation. It therefore focuses almost extensively on the Namasutro refugees who lived on the camps. And, so far as the methodology is concerned, in this book, we have clubbed different sources, including, archival materials and also the literary works. And we have also consulted the vernacular literature written by the Dalit writers. And also, we have included oral narratives. Since 2001, we have been collecting. Personally, I have started collecting when I was in CSDS. Started working with Ashish Nandi on the project Reconstruction of Life. I started visiting all the camps that are located within West Bengal. I think there are very few people who actually know the fact that we have still a few more camps existing within West Bengal, where some campmates are still living, those who are receiving cash doles and dry doles from the government of West Bengal. So I have started working on them and collected narratives just to understand their perception about their victimhood and the state policies about their rehabilitation. When we decided to work together, Shekhar and myself, then we also extensively visited Cooper's camp, Bagjola camp, and also Dhubulia, to understand the perception of these people. And it is also very interesting to tell you a story that when we speak some people regarding these dispersal plan and how did they perceive about this coercive, the compulsion to move from, say, for example, from Cooper's camp or Dhubulia camp to, Dandakaranya or Andaman. One of our respondents, he said that, whom we met in Cooper's camp, quite a old person, and he said that when these, and he used the word Dandakaranya Hawa, which means when the announcement of the Dandakaranya scheme came into existence, and when they heard about this scheme, then they decided not to go to Dandakaranya. But when they shared their, their feelings with the camp administrator, then they were being told that their cash dole and dry doles would be stopped very soon. So a coercive mechanism was followed all through, and we wanted to capture all these perceptions in our recent book. And one question may be raised, that why we use the word Dalit in our book. We use the word Dalit with caution, as we acknowledge that the word was never used in Bengal during the period of our study, that's 1946 and 1961. Why we stopped in 1961? Because the first phase of Dandakaranya scheme, it was stopped in 1961. Even today, some of the members of the scheduled caste communities, they do not use the word for self-identification, and would resent others using it to identify them. But while the term was not used in Bengal, some kind of self-assertive movements to claim their separate political status for the scheduled caste as a minority were significantly present here in the late colonial period. And another important reason is after the establishment of the Dalit Sahitya Academy by the West Bengal government in late 2020, the term has acquired further legitimacy. So, following this tradition, though we know that the term has not been used very popularly in Bengal, but we have used consciously to identify or to locate these group of people as a downtrodden in the social strata of society. So I will stop here and I will request everyone to read our book carefully, because we have really tried to unfold some experiences, some unheard stories, so far as the politics of rehabilitation is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I like to add something over here. I have recently finished reading this book and currently in the process of writing a review of it. And I absolutely find it amazing. Like it have put together two very important genres of Indian historiography. One is the partition and the other one is the caste historiography. So it's a beautiful blend of the two genres, and anyone who is interested in one of them or both of them, it's a must read book for anyone who is interested in this subject.
Thank you so
So,
much.
welcome, ma'am. So now I'll proceed to the next question, which is for
I,
Debjani,
I
ma'am.
am Mohana, I am
Yes.
missing Shekhar. I am missing Shekhar. In fact, yesterday I was talking to Shekhar if it is possible to join us. Then Shekhar told me that, oh, I'm sorry, it's that would be like midnight in Shekhar's New Zealand.
It's an absolutely great book, ma'am. I just now finished, like
Thank
very
you.
recently, I finished reading it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much.
So my question is for Debjani ma'am now. Ma'am, your book, The Partition of Bengal, Fragile Borders and New Identities, contain a chapter which especially deals with the portrayal of refugee rehabilitation in Dandakaranya with respect to Bengali partition fictions. Can you please tell us more about it? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to make initially the point which taking up Anindita's point that, when we are talking about Dandakaranya, there are very many layers that we have to go into. And this will be not only just the primary sources, as Anasua rightly mentions, these are oral sources, these are newspapers, these are textbooks, these are memoirs, these are, various kinds of documents. When I was dealing with this question, it really surprised me. And I'm entering Dandakaranya not as a historian. You can say that I'm pretending to be a historian. I'm actually a literature person. So I am a fake historian to a certain extent, but I am very interested in history. And I feel that literature and history have a very close connection. And literature, in one sense, is a very interesting source also for historians. And you know that much better than I do, that historians are now increasingly turning towards literary sources as very important primary texts as well. So what really interested me was that although Dandakaranya was such a important rehabilitation plan in post-partition India, it is very surprising that there was so little literature actually on it. Literature I mean canonical literature. I don't mean literature like in the primary sources or a text like Aranyalipi. Anindita, incidentally, I have a copy of Aranyalipi, so if you want to consult it, you are most welcome. So what really surprised me was that so few established Bengali literatures were actually taking up the question of Dandakaranya, the question of this whole business of trying to push away a huge population who were entering the state and who were actually forcibly were being pushed away. Now, I have really tried to think about it, and I kept on thinking, why is it so? And to a certain extent, it may sound simplistic, but canonical Bengali literatures in the 50s and 60s were mostly upper caste. And they were, of course, they were very sympathetic to the refugee cause. They wrote on refugee issues. But I think one of the very interesting reasons why Dandakaranya has never actually been very central to Bengali literature is because of, again, we come back to the politics of identity. I think it is because it is a scheduled caste population, because they were agriculturalists, because they were rural, because they were marginalized. There was a certain way in which they have remained silent and they have remained invisible in the canonical Bengali literature. Of course, when I'm saying this, I am also sure that there is an exception. And the exception is, of course, Shaktipada Rajguru's fantastic novel, Dandok Theke Morid Jhapi, which was for many years out of print. And it only came back in print, sometime towards 2000, 1999, 2000. So it was very surprising to me that, when I started hunting for this text, not a single text was available anywhere. It was just completely obliterated from the history of Bengali literature. And it was so shocking that a novelist like Rajguru, whose text Chenamuk has become a wonderful and a very famous film by Ritik Ghatak, Meghe Dhaka Tara. How can a novelist of that stature be completely ignored and completely sidelined in canonical, literature? So, it is also politics of representation. It is not just a politics of identity, but it is also a politics of representation. Who are the people who are making the school syllabus? Who are the people who are writing in newspapers, reviewing books? And it is absolutely astounding to see that, such a brilliant novel like Dandok Theke Morid Jhapi has never been translated. It has not been discussed. If you look at a history of Bengali literature, you won't even find a single mention of that text. So there is something, something seriously very interesting happening here. It is politics of representation, because it is politics of representation which is deeply, deeply embedded in caste. And I am very grateful to Anasua and to Shekhar Bandyopadhyay for bringing this absolutely very important volume to light, because it was long needed. It was crying out for, partition historiography was crying out for a text like this. So apart from, I'm going to just wrap up with the last sentence, that apart from Shaktipada Rajguru, there is one other text which actually mentions Dandakaranya very directly, and that is a very thin novel by Amyo Bhushan Mujumdar called Nirbash. It is set in 1959 when the first group of displaced people were being sent to Dandakaranya. But Amyo Bhushan's novel is not very critical of what was this whole developmental plan which was happening, which unlike Shaktipada Rajguru's text is actually very clear about the way. And Anindita, you were talking about the voices of the refugees. I was fortunate enough to interview Rajguru just a couple of months before his death, and he told me that many of the characters that he had actually uh, written in this novel were people he had met. He had met them. So it's a very interesting process, how history is then converted into literature, and I'm very interested in that process. So it's just not about somebody going and reading a primary text or doing an interview, but it is also a very interesting creative process through which a very sensitive writer who is, and he is not a refugee, please if you know a little bit about Rajguru, he's a Goti. He has absolutely no uh, family linkages to the refugee history or rehabilitation or partition or anything like that. But when I asked him why does he consistently take up the refugee question in text after text, he says that I was just very moved by the plight of these people, and I thought that is what I could do. I could write about them. But it is very interesting, and I go back to my that last point which I'm making, that it is also very interesting that just writing is not enough. There is also the politics of representation and how that writing is then disseminated in a larger public sphere. So this whole panel on Dandakaranya is very timely. It is very timely, and I think it is very important that we constantly go back and look into this issue again and again and again, because to me partition is not just a communal division, a religious division of a land. The partition actually is a long durée. It is about rehabilitation, it is about refugeehood, it is about resettlement, and these questions are not over. As Anindita said, there are so many refugee camps even now that functions and which are open. Amiya Sen actually came back to Delhi, to work in Kosturba Niketan, which is the refugee camp in Lajpat Nagar. So she actually then took up the job here, and then started working here after that stint. Um, so, so partition is not over. Partition is not something that is over and done with. But many issues are still alive in many ways. And I think Anasua and Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's book actually reminds us how these issues are constantly alive even now.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I have read the chapter and it's absolutely amazing because we get to know about so many books and so many references are there which are normally not known to us. So when I as a researcher and reading your book, I'm getting to know about those sources as well, which I'm not normally familiar with, and I would really like to thank you for like giving us that knowledge and also sharing that knowledge with us right now. So now I'd move on to my next question, which is for Anindita ma'am. Ma'am, your book, Refugees, Border and Identities, Rights and Habitat in East and Northeast India, you have dealt with the question of refugee rehabilitation in northeastern region. In places like Tripura, there were already many tribal people, and the migration of Bengali refugees caused a scenario of cultural conflict. Just like the arrival of Bengali refugees in Dandakaranya created a tension among the local tribals. In this regard, how do you think the case of Dandakaranya was similar or different in comparison with the Northeast? Over to you, ma'am.
I don't think actually. Thanks for this question. I don't think actually both these cases are similar. Okay, as if we look at the history of Tripura, actually the Maharajas of Tripura, the Manikya Maharajas of Tripura, they actually first probably they first invited a batch of Bengalis, very educated Bengalis, and they were Brahmins in the year 1280. So the migration of the Bengalis, especially the educated Bengalis, who were culturally superior probably than the tribals. So the migration of the Bengalis were not something very new. And here I wish to mention that if we look at the refugee history carefully, so in 1956, if we try to understand that what was the actual scenario in West Bengal, so the UCRC people, they have actually started demanding everything in 1956. In 1956, if we look at Assam, another like huge refugee, like who actually had to accept the refugees, the state government was not very keen to settle down them, whatever, like Assam, in Assam actually the state government, they tried hard not to implement the policies of the central government, as they constantly they tried to show that Assam is full and they don't want any more Bengalis anymore. But in the year 1956, the administration, the Tripura administration, first they have like written to the central government for some kind of doles or some kind of support. So it's so surprising. So before 1956, the government of Tripura, the state government of Tripura, at that point of time, the term was Tripura administration with a capital A. So they actually tried to treat these refugees as internal migrants. So Tripura has a very different kind of history, as Tripura consisted of two portions, the hill Tripura and the plain Tripura. Plain Tripura means the Chakla Roshanabad Tripura. So the peasants of the Chakla Roshanabad Tripura, they were like the subjects of Tripura Maharaja. So when they thought that they can't live in that land, so they decided to migrate. And for the administration of Tripura, it was normal, as they thought that, okay, they are our Diratiya Projas only, so we'll have to give them some kind of settlement. So the logic was very clear. So they actually tried to rehabilitate them. But if we look at the history of West Bengal and Assam, no one actually got rehabilitation in the year 1956. But if we look at the history of Tripura, like there are so many families who got permanent rehabilitation in Tripura. But in case of Dandakaranya, the scenario was absolutely different. And in case of Tripura, actually, I always try to write down the like tribal perspective as well, as we'll have to remember, we always, since we are more sympathetic on the Bengali refugees, so we always try to write, we are tend to write more about their voices, their demands and their issues of crisis, etc., etc. But we'll have to like remember that if you think about a home like your own home, and if you suddenly feel that since I know that 3 or 4 people are there at your homes, and if you suddenly feel that like 20 families came and they are trying to like share your resources, or they are trying to share your space, like literary space, okay, so it's not a very comfortable kind of idea. So in case of Tripura, they always, like when I try to interview people, they always like told me that, you call it an independence, but we consider 1949 as it is like a failure of the monarchy, that they couldn't like keep their princely state kind of identity or kind of status, and like they had to sign the treaty of accession. So the way we perceive independence, and we perceive, like we try to glorify independence, for them it was like a decline of their state. So we'll have to remember that point of view as well. So in case of Dandakaranya, the tribal people, so lots of newspaper reports are there, and unfortunately in all those newspaper reports, if you try to read about the tribals or the attitude of the tribals in Dandakaranya, so the administration, they try to portray them as savage, they were very hostile, and they are very inhospitable, and they try to trouble the refugees like anything. But just imagine about their situation. They didn't have any idea about a community called Bengali, and they were not seasoned with their kind of language, and they didn't even know that what we're doing in their land. As for them also, it was their land. So for the Bengalis, the tribals were other, and as well as for the tribals, the Bengalis were other. And if you try to imagine that, what was the mentality of the tribals and why they became more hostile, they could easily figure out that the percentage of population of the tribals and the percentage of the population of the Bengali refugees, so it was so dissimilar. And they could easily figure out that after like 10 years or after 15 years, these Bengalis, they will try to dominate their own land, in which from the tribals perspective, they don't have any right. So like no government, they can impose a huge chunk of people on our land, and they were not even aware about it, as no one discussed all these things with them. And they try to categorize them as tribals. This word tribal is problematic, and they try to categorize them as savage and uncivilized. But who is going to decide like what is civilization and who is uncivilized? So these are like very very tricky questions, I believe, and that is the reason I always try to write down about the two portion of the story. So I think like for the social scientists, it's very important. So when I ask myself and I try to situate myself like in their place, I always feel that probably if I'm in that situation, probably I will also behave in the same way, like the way the tribals behave. Suddenly they realized that a dam is there. So the government was constructing a dam, so they didn't know that what to do with the dam. So if you read reports from 1956, in one way central government is advertising and they are publishing photos that they are doing so many things for the irrigation. So the agriculturists, these refugees, they will just go and they will start cultivating rice. But it was not the situation really. And you just imagine the shock of those tribal families who were not like seasoned with anything. Suddenly they realized that someone is trying to block their kind of river and everything. So it was a disaster for them. So I think that the feeling of otherness, what I was mentioning, both for the refugees and for the tribals, so it was normal and it was natural. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
You
ma'am.
beautifully
You beautifully
depicted the
depicted the
problems that
problem.
the tribals faced. Like they were also living in their own home, and they suddenly like faced with new problems, and they didn't knew how to react. So, like a very good point you have raised over here. So now I would like to move up to the next question, which is for Anusua, ma'am. Ma'am, refugees are normally treated as homogeneous units, yet in reality, there exist differences between them on the basis of caste, religion, or class.
I think Mohana is having some issues with her network.
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought I am having some issue. Okay.
No, 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 it is Mohana. We can't hear her.
yeah. Maybe her signal is poor.
Yeah, yeah.
Mohana, you need to repeat your question as we couldn't hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Suddenly my network got disconnected. So my question is, refugees are normally treated as homogeneous units, yet in reality there exist differences between them on the basis of caste, class, and gender. Ma'am, how do you think these differences play a determining role in deciding their future in the host community? Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for Mohana for raising this very important question. Yes, we do argue in our book that refugee was not a monolithic category. Although united by the shared pain of displacement, uh, they were uh, uh, they were differentiated by experiences of rehabilitation, and also they have a different experiences of their journey from their homeland to the land which was alien to them, and the land which actually forced them to have their acquired identity, that is refugee. The Savarna Bhadralok refugees who came before 1950, which with considerable amount of cultural and social capital, as I have already pointed out that they were in a better situation, they were better treated by the Indian state, and they were considered to be assets, and the rehabilitation was prioritized by the government over that of the Dalit peasants who came in the 1950s. The latter group, which is Dalit, they were seen as a burden for a frail economy of West Bengal, and their rehabilitation became an issue of intense political debate. So, the factor all along prevailed, whether it is in relation to getting relief or whether it is in relation to their struggle for getting rehabilitation. And while we were working for the book, I think we have found, or we have come across three distinct levels of leadership in dealing with this politics of relief and rehabilitation. At the bottom, there were the camp leaders. Mainly of them were many of them were Namasutras, but some were also from the other castes as well. But these camp leadership had to depend on provincial, political leaders of the two state level refugee organizations I have already, talked about. That's the SBBS, which is Shara Bangla Bastuhara Shammilan, and also the UCRC, the Popular refugee council, who work for the refugee rehabilitation and refugee demands and protection. And in the second, on the other hand, in the second layer, actually uh, we have the leaders who are basically belong to the district level and the state level, political parties, and they are basically belong to Bhadralok community. So definitely they intended to increase their support base out of these camp dwellers, and basically they gave instruction or instructed how the movement would take place, and and of course, we have found a third intermediary, level of leadership between the camp dwellers and the mainstream political leadership, and there were the provincial Dalit leaders. And we have extensively, nurtured and analyzed the role of two prominent Dalit leaders during these period of our study. One, of course, Prabhupada Ranjan Thakur, P.R. Thakur, who was very close to Congress, who was a Congress MLA, and who was a supporter of Dandakaranya. It's very interesting, Dandakaranya scheme. And the other political leader is, of course, infamous Jogendranath Mondal, who was the first law and labor minister in Pakistan after partition, who worked in collaboration with SBBS. But when he felt frustrated when the 1958, the entire campaign was withdrawn, then he actually organized another platform which is called EIRC, uh, which he himself considered as a non-political organization. But again, that will be a political debate if we term it as a non-political organization or political based organization. But all through our analysis, we have found that caste question prevails everywhere. You know, whether we accept the fact or we consciously ignore the fact. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You have very nicely portrayed that we normally consider a refugee as something very homogeneous, a homogeneous community, but it is absolutely not that. And your new book have also portrayed the same thing. In fact, Anindita ma'am's book also, her first book, over there also we can say see the same thing. Like in the very preface, she have mentioned like many people thinks the common perception is that refugees are homogeneous community, but it's absolutely not. There are many layers of division among them, and this division does play a very important part in determining their future. So now my question is for Debjani ma'am. Ma'am, literature sometimes simultaneously contains both elements of truth and exaggeration. In this regard, how can a reader differentiate between these two elements? It would be great if you can introduce us to some literature related to the Bengali refugees in Dandakaranya. Over to you, ma'am. Debjani ma'am, can you, ma'am, am I audible?
I guess she got frozen, Mohana.
I think she is having some network issue. Hmm. Okay, till then we can proceed to the last question for you, ma'am, Anindita ma'am. And if she comes back, we'll ask her the question again. So now let's proceed to the last question, which is for Anindita ma'am. Ma'am, the Bengali refugees of East Pakistan came in the hope of getting rehabilitation in West Bengal. They had no intention to go to faraway places like Dandakaranya and Andaman. But as fate turns out, a section of the refugees had to leave for these places. What extra challenges did these refugees experience compared to the refugees who were able to get rehabilitation inside West Bengal? Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks for asking this question. I have actually elaborated this point a little bit, I believe, like when I was speaking. But to me, the most important part was like when if you look at the whole scenario very carefully, so you will see that these refugees who had to like settle themselves down in Dandakaranya, and if you try to talk to them right now, so you did a field work, so you also know probably. So they will now tell you like it's good that the government has forced them to settle down here. It's a very different kind of statements. As when I heard it for the first time, I was very shocked. I thought that I always thought that like their tone should be different and they should repent. But they said that it's like a bless that we got settled down here, as we struggled very hard, very hard. And like if you interview them, they will tell you probably at least 40 to 50% population like like who came to got settled down in Dandakaranya, they died even. So the rest of the people, some of them, they tried to come back to Morijhapi. That is another episode of history. But they had to go back. But when they realized that no one is there to give them any alternative or alternative kind of settlement, so they decided to settle down there. And if you now talk to them after the 75th years of partition, so if you now talk to them, they will tell you that it's not that bad that we are here, as we have our land, we have everything, like we got some kind of loans and everything. But if you think about like their cases when they came to Dandakaranya, it was the situation was pathetic, and they had to fight with like so many things. And here I wish to mention about their identity issues, as when they were in their own land, so they always try to like prove that what is their identity. And after coming to Dandakaranya, the Namashudros, they actually realize that they will have to assert their identity as Namashudros. So if you talk to them like right now, or if you are there to hear their opinion, or if you are there actually for a field trip or something like that, you will see that how desperately they are portraying their identity. So now they know that they will have to show like their identity. Otherwise, like for the political leaders, for the parties, for others, they will not get a similar kind of treatment. And like they say that it's kind of their democratic right to portray their identity as a scheduled caste, as a community, number one. Number two, they are more vocal about their religious identity. And in most of the cases, they will not say that they are Hindus, so they will say that we are the Namashudras, and they will like keep on talking about their kind of religion. And for them it became their kind of identity. So I think that this dimension is actually very, very interesting. As first they suffered as a community, and they were actually, they were confused as that why they were there. But later, especially after the Morijhapi incident, they realized that they don't have any other option and they will have to be there, and otherwise they don't have any place to go back. So then they realized that okay, if they were there, so they will have to make their clear own identity. So for them, that is not a typical Hindu identity like the way we see it everywhere. So it is more a Namashudra identity, and it is more a religious kind of identity. So now, like now, their identity is very clear. Number one, number two, like at least to me, at least 6-7 families, they said that it's good only that they got settled down in Dandakaranya, as they have huge land, they have cows, they have everything. But like their next generation people, they are not interested about their kind of Bengaliness, and they can't study in Bangla medium. So the only complaint that I hear, that this generation is losing actually losing their own culture and own literature or own kind of like songs and everything. So that is the only repentance which I heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. Each one of you have portrayed beautiful like insights that we should think about. Like you have just now said that they are losing their Bengaliness. So this is also a very important factor. Like losing someone's culture because they might have economic prosperity or they are well off economic currently, but again they are losing somewhere, and this is somewhere we should really think about. And now I'd like to thank each and every one of you, all our panelists, for for the very insightful conversation and for your time this evening. So now here are we to the concluding section. Tell me your story calls for submission of poetry and short stories on the writing from Dandakaranya. We'll return with our next panel discussion very soon. Till then, stay well, stay safe, stay happy. Good night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.